What happens when a self-proclaimed HOA enforcer tries to strip a veteran of the very jacket he wore while serving his country, and then finds herself face-to-face with his old Special Forces unit? "Take that jacket off right now. It doesn't belong here." Those were the words that broke the quiet of a sunny Saturday afternoon in a suburban cul-de-sac in Greensboro, North Carolina. Neighbors watering their lawns, kids pedaling scooters, and even the mail carrier paused mid-step as their eyes turned to the confrontation happening near the freshly paved sidewalk. On one side stood Paula Greaves, clipboard tucked under her arm, her expression sharp and unyielding. She had lived in this community for over 15 years and, in her mind, had become the guardian of its order. As the vice president of the neighborhood's HOA, she saw herself as the last line of defense against anything, or anyone, that disrupted the standards she believed held everything together. On the other side was Andre Callan, a 41-year-old Army veteran who had just moved in with his wife and 7-year-old daughter. He was dressed in jeans, sneakers, and his camouflage jacket. To him, it wasn't just an item of clothing. It was a layer of identity, a reminder of long nights in desert heat, dangerous missions with his unit, and the quiet pride of service that never left a soldier, even after the uniform came off. Andre froze for a moment, more out of disbelief than anger. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice calm, though his jaw flexed slightly. "You heard me," Paula snapped. "That military gear makes this neighborhood look unsafe. We don't dress like that here. We have standards." The air shifted. A few neighbors stopped pretending to fiddle with their hedges and started listening closely. A teenager lowered his basketball to hear better. Andre, standing steady, looked at her as though trying to decide whether she was serious or simply looking for a fight. "Ma'am," he finally said, his voice even and respectful. "This is just a jacket. I served in the Army for years. It's a part of me. Nothing unsafe about it, but Paula wasn't interested in explanations. Service or not, that's not appropriate for this neighborhood. We keep things respectable here. Take it off." Andre felt the sting in her words. He had faced worse, moments where his life had hung by a thread in places far from home. But somehow, standing here on a suburban sidewalk in the country he served, this hit differently. Not because of the demand itself, but because it came from someone who had never sacrificed, never known the weight behind that jacket, yet felt entitled to diminish it. A neighbor, an older man named Harvey Simmons, shuffled closer with his watering can, trying to break the tension. "Hey now, Paula, come on, it's just a jacket." Let the man be. Paula shot him a look that silenced him. She wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not in front of a growing audience. Andre looked around, noticing the crowd gathering. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every neighbor watching to see how he handled the moment. He straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Paula. "With all due respect," he said, "I've worn this jacket in places you can't imagine. Places where friends of mine gave everything they had so people back home could argue about things like lawns and mailboxes in peace. If you think I'm taking it off because it offends you, you're mistaken." The words hung in the air. For the first time, Paula's face faltered, her confidence flickering. But then she tightened her grip on her clipboard and doubled down. "We'll see what the HOA board has to say about that," she muttered, scribbling furiously. Andre could have pushed back harder. He could have raised his voice. Instead, he turned, adjusted his jacket, and walked calmly back toward his driveway, where his daughter waited on the porch steps, her wide eyes taking in every word. He gave her a reassuring smile, though inside, something stirred. An old instinct, the feeling of standing your ground without raising your weapon. The neighbors stood still, the tension not fully broken, as Paula stormed off down the sidewalk, muttering about rules and appearances. But beneath the surface, something had shifted in the neighborhood that afternoon. Respect, suspicion, pride, and shame had all collided on that strip of pavement, and nothing would be quite the same again. But Paula wasn't finished yet, and neither was Andre, because what happened next would ripple far beyond a single jacket. To understand what happened next, you need to know who Paula Greaves was in that neighborhood. She wasn't just a long-time resident. She had practically made herself the face of the HOA. People joked, sometimes quietly, that Paula had two identities, the friendly neighbor who baked banana bread during the holidays, and the HOA officer who could spot a mailbox chipped by 2 shades of paint from 100 yards away. Her house sat on the corner lot, perfectly manicured, shutters painted navy blue with military precision, and a driveway free of so much as a stray leaf. Paula lived for appearances. She believed that order kept property values high, and she carried that belief like a badge of honor. Some admired her attention to detail, but most people just tolerated it. They didn't want trouble. They knew better than to argue when Paula came knocking with her clipboard. Andre Callan didn't know that yet. He and his wife Renee had only moved in a few weeks earlier. Their daughter, Naya Callan, had just started 2nd grade at Jefferson Elementary. The Callans had chosen Greensboro for its quiet neighborhoods and good schools. After years of military service, Andre wanted stability, a safe place to raise his daughter, a home that didn't feel temporary. Their first weeks had been filled with unpacking, trips to Home Depot, and neighborhood waves that felt polite but distant. Andre had noticed the way people studied him, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with hesitation. He figured it was normal. A new family always attracted stares. Renee, ever the optimist, reminded him that settling in took time. "Give them a chance," she'd say while folding boxes in the garage. "People need to get used to new faces. You'll see. It'll be fine." But even she noticed how quickly Paula seemed to circle their home. Within the first week, Paula had stopped by twice, once to remind them about trash bin placement, and another time to suggest that their grass was half an inch too long compared to the HOA handbook standard. Renee smiled through both encounters, though Andre could see the irritation behind her polite nods. "You'd think we moved on to a military base with all these rules," he joked one evening while flipping burgers on their new grill. Renee laughed but replied quietly, "The difference is you actually respected your commanding officers." "This one?" She tilted her head toward Paula's corner house. "She just likes the power." Andre didn't disagree. What made it harder was how neighbors reacted, or rather didn't react. Everyone knew Paula was strict. Some whispered about her confrontations with past residents, the young couple whose garden gnome she declared unapproved decor, the retired teacher who was fined for keeping a flag out a day past the holiday. People rolled their eyes about her antics in private, but when it came to standing up to her, silence ruled the day. Andre wasn't the kind of man to be rattled by small-town authority. He had spent his adult life in war zones where silence could mean life or death. But he also wasn't a man who went looking for unnecessary fights. His goal was to build a peaceful life, not stir trouble. Still, that jacket confrontation left him unsettled in a way he couldn't quite shake. Renee noticed. Later that night, as he sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone, she reached across and touched his hand. "She doesn't matter," Renee said softly. "People like her look for control because they don't have it anywhere else. Let it go." Andre sighed. "It's not about her. It's about what she said. About what it means when someone like her thinks they can strip away something that's part of who I am. I wore this jacket on nights when I didn't know if I'd make it home. I wore it while watching brothers fall. And now, here, she thinks it's inappropriate." Renee squeezed his hand tighter. "Then don't give her that power. Be yourself. That's all that matters." The Callans weren't alone in noticing the shift after the jacket incident. A few neighbors who had stood watching that afternoon replayed the scene in their minds. Some admired Andre's calm restraint. Others whispered about Paula's overreach, but none spoke up openly, at least not yet. Meanwhile, Paula was busy writing her complaint. She sat at her kitchen counter that night, pen in hand, carefully citing the HOA guidelines she believed backed her argument. In her mind, this wasn't about disrespecting a veteran. It was about rules, appearances, and the kind of order she thought kept the community safe. The truth was, Paula's obsession with control had roots deeper than most knew. Years earlier, she had gone through a messy divorce that left her scrambling for stability. The HOA became her kingdom, her way of feeling powerful in a world where she often felt powerless. That clipboard wasn't just a tool, it was her shield. Andre didn't know that history, and frankly, it wouldn't have mattered. All he knew was that his jacket had become a battleground for something bigger than himself. But Paula's complaint was only the beginning, because once the words left her pen, they set off a chain of events that neither she nor Andre could have predicted. Saturday mornings in Greensboro usually carried a rhythm of their own. Lawnmowers droned, sprinklers ticked across yards, and the smell of bacon or pancakes drifted from open windows. That particular morning, Andre had taken his daughter Nia to the farmer's market downtown. She loved the stalls with homemade jams and jars of honey, and he enjoyed the chance to support local vendors. He was dressed casually, worn jeans, running shoes, and his old camouflage jacket. The jacket had been with him for over a decade, its fabric softened by time, the patches faint from sun and sand. To Andre, it was like a second skin. When they returned home, Nia bounded up the porch steps carrying a paper bag filled with apples. Andre lingered by the driveway, adjusting the straps of another bag when he noticed movement across the street. Paula was there, standing with her clipboard, her eyes locked on him as if she had been waiting for this moment. She crossed the street with purpose, heels clicking against the pavement. "Mr. Callan," she called out, her tone clipped. Andre turned, already sensing the storm. "Yes?" "That jacket," she said, pointing at it with her pen as though it were a weapon. "It doesn't belong here. This neighborhood has standards. Military clothing is not appropriate." Andre blinked, caught between confusion and irritation. "It's a jacket," he replied evenly. "I've worn it for years." "It's mine." Paula's voice rose slightly, just enough for nearby neighbors trimming hedges and walking dogs to hear. "This is a family neighborhood. That sort of clothing sends the wrong message. People don't feel safe when they see camouflage hanging around their street." From the porch, Nia called, "Daddy, are we going inside?" Her little voice trembled, sensing something wasn't right. Andre gave her a reassuring smile before turning back to Paula. "With respect, Mom, I served in the U.S. Army for over 15 years. This jacket has been with me longer than any house I've lived in. It doesn't make anyone unsafe." "It represents service," Paula scoffed. "I don't care what it represents. We have rules. I'll be submitting a formal complaint. If you care about fitting in, you'll take it off." The exchange drew more eyes. Harvey Simmons, the older neighbor who had tried once before to mediate Paula's zeal, slowly approached from his lawn. "Paula," he said carefully, "he's just standing in his own driveway. He's not bothering anyone." Paula snapped her head toward him. "Harvey, you don't understand. We have an image to maintain. If we let one person break standards, the whole place starts falling apart. First jackets, then who knows what else." Andre's voice carried a note of steel now, though he remained calm. "I fought overseas, so people back here wouldn't have to worry about things like jackets. I lost friends who'll never come home. You may think this is about appearances, but for me, it's about remembering them. I won't take it off because it makes you uncomfortable." Silence fell over the small crowd that had gathered. A neighbor pushing a stroller paused mid-step. A teenage boy leaned against a lamppost, his eyes wide. People weren't used to seeing anyone challenge Paula so directly. For a brief second, Paula hesitated. Her eyes flickered, unsure. But then, just as quickly, she regained her footing. "I'll put it in writing," she declared firmly. "This isn't about your service, Mr. Callan. It's about rules. If you don't like them, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." The words stung, and Andre felt heat rise in his chest. But instead of answering, he simply adjusted the strap of the bag on his shoulder and turned toward his house. "Come on, Nia," he said gently. His daughter took his hand, and together they walked inside. Renee, watching from the window, caught his eyes and saw the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. She opened the door, ushering them in with a worried look. Once inside, Renee whispered, "What happened?" Andre set down the bag slowly. "She thinks my jacket makes the neighborhood unsafe." Renee stared at him, incredulous. "Unsafe? You wore that jacket while protecting this country." Andre shrugged, though the weight of Paula's words pressed heavy on his shoulders. In her mind, the rules matter more than the people living under them. From the window, he could still see Paula scribbling furiously on her clipboard before marching back toward her corner house. Neighbors drifted away, murmuring among themselves. Some looked embarrassed, others curious. Andre exhaled deeply, his hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "I thought I left this kind of fight behind when I left the army," he said softly. Renee wrapped her arms around him, steadying him. "You don't need to fight her. Just live your life." That's the best answer. He wanted to believe her. But something inside told him that Paula wasn't finished, and that this jacket had sparked a fire she wasn't going to let burn out quietly. But Paula's complaint wasn't just paperwork. It was a match tossed into dry grass, and soon the whole neighborhood would feel the heat. Paula didn't waste time. By Monday morning, she had already drafted a 3-page complaint addressed to the HOA board. Every line carried her familiar tone, sharp, self-assured, sprinkled with references to community standards and the preservation of neighborhood harmony. She cited obscure clauses from the handbook, twisting them into support for her argument that Andre's jacket presented an intimidating presence. Copies of the complaint were slid into the mailboxes of every household on the street. Paula liked to make things public. It gave her the advantage of framing the story before anyone else could. By the afternoon, whispers started spreading, and by evening, most neighbors had read her words. Andre found out when his wife, Renee, opened their mailbox. She unfolded the crisp packet and read aloud at the kitchen table, her voice trembling with disbelief. "She's saying your jacket could discourage families with young children from feeling comfortable outdoors." Renee tossed the papers down, shaking her head. "This isn't just nitpicking anymore. She's painting you like some kind of threat." Andre read it for himself, jaw tightening as his eyes scanned the lines. He wasn't surprised Paula followed through, but seeing his name printed like that, as though he were a danger to his own neighbors, hit differently. "She's not going to stop," he muttered. "This is about control." The next day, the issue spilled into the open. A few neighbors gathered near the cul-de-sac as kids played tag in the street. Paula stood with her clipboard under one arm, casually reminding people to check their mailboxes. She spoke in her usual authoritative tone, as though her word carried official weight. Andre stepped outside to wheel the trash bin to the curb. The air shifted again, just as it had during the jacket confrontation. Conversations hushed. Eyes followed him. Some sympathetic, some uncertain, others carefully neutral. Paula seized the moment. "Callan," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Have you had a chance to review the complaint I submitted? It's very clear. This community has guidelines and your clothing violates them." Andre paused, his hand on the trash bin handle. He could feel Renee watching from the porch and little Nia peeking from behind the curtains. The entire cul-de-sac had become an audience. He walked slowly toward Paula. "Yes, I saw it," he said firmly but calmly. "And I'll say again, it's a jacket. My jacket. I wore it while serving this country. There's no rule that says I can't wear it. You may not like how it looks, but that doesn't make it wrong." Paula's chin lifted. "Neighborhood appearance isn't about personal preference. It's about protecting property values. If potential buyers see people wearing combat gear, they'll think the area is unsafe." Harvey Simmons, standing nearby with his dog's leash, finally spoke up. "Combat gear. Paula, it's just a jacket. He's not patrolling the street with a rifle. Let the man wear what he wants." Paula gave him a cold smile. "Harvey, if you don't care about your property's value, that's your choice. Some of us take pride in this community." Andre shook his head slowly. "You talk about pride, but you don't understand mine. You don't understand what this jacket means. You think it's fabric. To me, it's memory, sacrifice, and respect for those who didn't come back. You think I'm lowering property values? I wore this while defending your right to complain." Murmurs rippled through the neighbors. A few shifted uncomfortably. One woman whispered to another, "She's gone too far this time." Paula felt the balance slipping and raised her voice. "Rules are rules, Mr. Callan. If you can't follow them, perhaps this isn't the right place for your family." Andre held her gaze, his voice steady but carrying weight. "We moved here to build a home, not to be told who we can or can't be. My family belongs here as much as anyone else's. If you don't see that, that's your problem, not mine." For a moment, silence gripped the group. Children paused mid-game, sensing the tension. Paula's expression hardened, but behind her eyes something flickered. doubt, maybe even embarrassment. She quickly masked it. "Fine," she said stiffly. "The board will handle this." She turned on her heel and walked briskly back toward her house, heels striking the pavement like gavel hits. Andre let out a slow breath, then turned back toward his driveway. Renee met him halfway, her hand brushing his arm. "You handled that well," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her worry. "Handled or not," Andre replied quietly. "This isn't over." Neighbors drifted away, conversations buzzing in hushed tones. Some avoided Andre's eyes, others offered small nods of support, but none spoke openly. The line between silence and solidarity hadn't been crossed yet. Inside their home, Andre sat at the table, staring at the jacket folded neatly over the back of a chair. He thought of the brothers and sisters who had worn the same colors in places far harsher than this neighborhood. They had each other's backs without hesitation. Here, he was alone, at least for now. But word of the confrontation wouldn't stop at the end of the street, because beyond this cul-de-sac, Andre had people who never forgot what he meant to them. And when they heard, they weren't going to stay quiet. By Wednesday evening, the jacket confrontation had become the talk of the neighborhood. Some residents avoided Andre entirely, slipping back into their homes whenever he appeared outside. Others gave him polite smiles that carried a trace of pity, as though they felt bad but didn't dare say so out loud. A few offered more, subtle waves, quick comments about hanging in there, whispered assurances that Paula didn't speak for everyone. Renee noticed the shift while walking near to the bus stop. A young mother named Tessa Monroe leaned in as the kids lined up. "I saw what happened the other day," she murmured. "For what it's worth, I think she's wrong. Your husband shouldn't have to apologize for his service." Renee appreciated the words, but sensed the caution behind them. Nobody wanted to be on Paula's bad side. For years, Paula had controlled the narrative. People tolerated her because she made herself difficult to oppose. A single complaint from her could spiral into fines, hearings, or endless nagging. Most figured it was easier to keep their heads down. At the Callan home, the tension was heavier. Andre sat at the kitchen table in the evenings, his jacket folded neatly over the chair beside him, as though its presence gave him strength. Nia would sometimes reach for it, asking questions he found hard to answer. "Daddy, why doesn't Mrs. Greaves like your jacket? Did you do something wrong?" Andre knelt by her chair, holding her small hand in his. "No, baby, I didn't do anything wrong. Some people don't understand what things mean to others. This jacket, it reminds me of friends who were really brave. It's not about being scary. It's about remembering." Nia nodded slowly, though confusion lingered in her eyes. Renee stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression caught between anger and sorrow. She hated that her daughter had to carry these questions. Later that night, Renee said what she'd been holding back. "Andre, this isn't just about a jacket anymore. She's making you out to be something you're not. And people are listening." Andre's voice was steady, but his words carried weight. "I know, and I can handle her. What I can't accept is Nia growing up thinking her father has to shrink himself to keep people comfortable." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday at the community clubhouse. By Thursday, everyone knew the jacket would be on the agenda. Paula made sure of it, casually reminding neighbors that a very serious standards issue needed to be addressed. Andre debated whether to attend. Renee urged him to skip it, fearing an ambush. But Andre had faced bigger battles than a room full of homeowners, and something inside told him that silence would only make things worse. Friday evening came, and the clubhouse parking lot filled quickly. Folding chairs lined the meeting room, neighbors chatting in hushed tones until Paula arrived, papers clutched in her hands. She took her place at the front like a judge, about to preside over a trial. Andre entered quietly, his presence drawing every eye. He wore the jacket, not as defiance, but as truth. He took a seat near the back, Renee at his side, her fingers laced tightly with his. Paula began with routine business, budget reports, landscaping contracts, but her impatience was visible. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Now, onto a matter that concerns the safety and appearance of our neighborhood. As you all know, mister, Callan has chosen to wear military attire that gives the wrong impression of our community. A low murmur rippled through the room. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward, eager for drama. Andre raised his hand. "I'd like to respond." Paula stiffened, but forced a smile. "Of course." He stood, the jacket settling naturally on his shoulders. His voice was calm, but carried to every corner of the room. "This jacket isn't a threat. It's not a uniform meant to intimidate anyone here. It's a part of me. I wore it while serving this country, and it reminds me of friends who didn't make it back. If that makes some people uncomfortable, I can't change that. But I won't erase who I am to fit into someone else's picture of what this community should look like." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the creak of a chair. Harvey Simmons spoke up, his voice gravelly but firm. "He's right. We've let one person's rules run this neighborhood for too long. It's a jacket. A man's right to wear what he wants should mean something, especially when he's earned it." Paula's face flushed, but she pressed on. "We have guidelines." Another voice cut in, sharper this time. "Guidelines don't cover jackets, Paula." It was Janet Reyes, who had lived 2 doors down from Paula for years. "You're twisting rules to suit your own opinion." The tide shifted in that moment. Neighbors who had been silent began speaking, one after another. Some timid, some bold, but all chipping away at Paula's authority. For once, her voice wasn't the only one filling the room. Andre remained standing, steady and composed, as the discussion spiraled away from him and toward Paula's leadership. He didn't need to argue anymore. The truth was speaking for itself. Still, he knew this wouldn't end neatly. Paula wasn't the type to back down without finding another way to reassert control. But Andre wasn't alone anymore, because outside this neighborhood, people who had fought beside him were about to hear what was happening, and their response would change everything. Word traveled quickly, though not in the way Paula expected. She thought her complaint would strengthen her grip, showing neighbors that she wasn't afraid to protect standards. Instead, it fractured her reputation. Some quietly agreed with her, but many more began questioning whether the HOA had become less about community and more about one woman's control. Andre didn't seek out sympathy, but he wasn't invisible either. A neighbor's son recorded part of the HOA meeting on his phone and shared it with friends online. Within hours, it circulated through local veteran groups. That's how Caleb Drummond, a former Special Forces sergeant and one of Andre's closest brothers in arms, saw it. Caleb called him the next morning. "Dre, you didn't tell me you had a war brewing in your own neighborhood?" His deep laugh carried warmth, but beneath it, Andre heard concern. "I didn't think it was worth making a fuss over," Andre admitted. "It's just a jacket. At least that's what I thought. Nothing's ever just a jacket." Caleb replied. "Not when it carries the weight it does for us. I'm coming down this weekend." Andre started to object, but Caleb's tone cut him short. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you, you carried me through worse than this. Time I returned the favor." By Saturday afternoon, Caleb's truck pulled into Andre's driveway. He stepped out, broad-shouldered and weathered, with that easy confidence of someone who had seen too much to be rattled by suburban drama. Beside him climbed out Jonas Ridley, tall and lean, his posture straight as a rifle. A third figure joined them. Marcusine Vale, one of the toughest operators Andre had ever served with, her presence commanding without a word spoken. Renee peeked through the window, surprised. "Andre? Who's here?" Andre smiled faintly. "Family." The reunion at the door was quiet but powerful. Hugs, firm handshakes, a few muttered jokes about how Andre looked too civilian now. Nia peeked out from behind her mother, wide-eyed. Marcusine crouched down to her level, smiling softly. "Your dad's one of the bravest men I've ever known," she told the girl. "Don't you forget that." For the rest of the afternoon, they sat around the kitchen table. Caleb listened as Andre explained what had happened, shaking his head with disbelief. A clipboard warrior picking fights with a man who's done more for this country than she can imagine. "I've seen it all." Jonas leaned back in his chair, his voice quiet but steady. "People like her don't understand respect until it's shown to them in a way they can't ignore." Marcusine folded her arms. "Then we'll show her. Not by threats, by presence, by reminding her that you're not standing alone." Andre hesitated. "I don't want to escalate this into something ugly. Renee and Nia need peace. not more attention. Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. Peace doesn't come by shrinking. It comes when people know you're not a target. Your family, Dre. If someone messes with one of us, they mess with all of us. That evening, the three veterans walked with Andre around the cul-de-sac. Not in uniform, not in formation, but together. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some stepping onto porches to watch. Paula herself stood stiffly on her lawn, clipboard clutched like a shield. Her eyes darted from one face to the next, recognition dawning, as she realized this wasn't just about Andre anymore. Caleb approached her with a calm smile. "Afternoon, Mom. I'm Caleb. This is Jonas, this is Marcusine. We served with Andre overseas. Thought we'd stop by, see how he's settling in." Paula forced a tight smile. "Well, yes, of course. This is a family neighborhood. We expect everyone to respect the rules." Marcusine stepped forward, her voice polite but firm. "Respect goes both ways. You may not like Andre's jacket, but it tells a story of sacrifice, of brothers and sisters who stood together in places you'll never have to see. You benefit from that every day you wake up here." Paula's composure faltered. Her mouth opened, then closed. Neighbors nearby leaned in, curious, sensing the shift. Jonas added quietly, "We didn't come here to cause trouble, but we don't let one of our own stand alone. Not then, and not now." For once, Paula had no sharp retort. She muttered something about needing to get dinner started, and retreated toward her front door, her clipboard trembling slightly in her grip. As the veterans stood with Andre, Harvey Simmons called from his porch. "About time someone told her." Laughter, small but real, rippled through a few neighbors who had been silent too long. Andre felt something loosen in his chest. For the first time since moving in, he wasn't carrying the weight alone. He looked at his old teammates, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. Caleb clapped him on the back. "You'd have done the same for us. And we're not done yet." But their visit wasn't just about standing by Andre. It was the spark that pushed the rest of the neighborhood to choose sides. And soon, Paula would find herself facing more than she ever expected. The following evening, the sun dipped low over the neighborhood, painting the street in a warm orange glow. Kids zipped past on bikes, couples strolled lazily with dogs on leashes, and sprinklers hissed across tidy lawns. For once, there was a hum of normalcy in the air. But that peace didn't last long. Andre's unit had spent the afternoon catching up with him and Renee, trading stories only veterans could tell. Some funny, some haunting. Yet every conversation circled back to the same point. Paula wasn't finished. They all knew it. And if she wasn't confronted directly, her grip on the community would tighten again. As twilight settled in, Caleb stood and adjusted his ball cap. "We're paying her a visit," he said simply. Andre frowned. "I don't need a war on my street." Caleb smirked. "This isn't a war. This is a conversation. One she can't ignore." Jonas and Marcusine nodded in quiet agreement. Renee touched Andre's arm. "Maybe they're right. She's been running this neighborhood unchecked for years. Someone has to stand up to her." Minutes later, the four of them walked across the street. Neighbors peeked out from behind blinds, sensing something about to unfold. Paula herself was on her porch, watering her flower pots with one hand while balancing her clipboard in the other. When she spotted them, her watering can paused mid-air. "Evening, missus!" "Greaves," Caleb called, his voice even. Paula straightened, her jaw tightening. "Good evening. Can I help you?" "We just came to introduce ourselves properly," Marcusine said, her tone polite but edged with authority. "We served with Andre overseas. We thought you should know who you've been talking about." Paula shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between them. "I don't see how that's relevant. This is about rules, not personal histories." Jonas stepped forward slightly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the porch steps. His voice was quiet but carried weight. "It's relevant because you've been treating him like a stranger when he's given more to this country than most. You think a jacket makes this neighborhood unsafe? You have no idea what unsafe really means." Andre spoke up then, his voice calm. "I didn't ask them to come here, Paula. They came because they believe in me. Because we don't leave each other standing alone. Paula bristled. This is intimidation. You're trying to gang up on me. Marcasine's eyes locked onto hers. No, this is perspective. Intimidation is when you corner a man in front of his child, demanding he erase a part of himself to make you feel comfortable. That's intimidation. Paula's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, her clipboard looked less like a badge of authority and more like a flimsy shield. Caleb softened his tone. We're not here to fight. We're here to remind you that respect isn't one-sided. You may have rules, but rules mean nothing without humanity behind them. Andre's earned his place here, and if you can't see that, then maybe the problem isn't his jacket, it's your pride. Silence pressed in. Neighbors lingered at driveways, pretending to fiddle with tools or pets, but really hanging on to every word. Paula's cheeks flushed. I'm only doing what's best for the community. Andre shook his head slowly. No, Paula. You're doing what's best for you. There's a difference. The moment hung heavy. For once, Paula had no sharp comeback, no citation of rules to shield herself. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally muttered, I think this conversation is over. She turned, retreating toward her front door. But the sight of her backpedaling in front of an audience wasn't lost on the neighbors. For years, Paula had been the voice of authority on this street. Now she looked small, cornered not by threats, but by truth spoken plainly. As the group stepped off her porch, Harvey Simmons raised his hand from across the street. About time someone stood up to her, he said loudly enough for others to hear. A few neighbors chuckled nervously, some even clapped quietly, emboldened by the shift they'd just witnessed. Andre glanced at Caleb, Jonas, and Marcasine. He didn't like making scenes, but he knew this one mattered. It wasn't just about a jacket anymore. It was about showing that Paula's authority wasn't untouchable. Back inside his home, Renee exhaled deeply, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. That was something, she whispered. Andre kissed his daughter's forehead as she curled against him on the couch. Remember this, Nia, he told her softly. When you stand for what's right, you don't have to stand alone. But while Paula had been silenced in that moment, the real shift was happening among the neighbors, and soon their voices would carry louder than hers ever had. The morning after this porch confrontation, the neighborhood felt different. Not in obvious ways. The lawns were still freshly trimmed, sprinklers still ticked in predictable arcs, and kids still waited at the bus stop clutching backpacks. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. People who once avoided eye contact with Andre now waved. A few even stopped to chat, testing the waters of a new balance. At the Callens' driveway, Harvey Simmons ambled over, his golden retriever tugging at the leash. Andre, he said, tipping his ball cap. What you did last night, that was something. Folks around here have been waiting a long time for someone to show her she's not the sheriff of this street. Andre offered a faint smile. Didn't feel like much. Just words, Harvey chuckled. Words carry more weight than you think, especially when they come from a man who's lived through what you have. Later that day, Renee noticed a knock at the door. It was Janet Reyes, the neighbor who had spoken up during the HOA meeting. She held a plate of cookies, her hands trembling slightly as she extended it. I just wanted to say thank you, Janet murmured. Most of us have been too scared to push back, but when you stood your ground, it gave the rest of us courage. Maybe now we can breathe a little easier. Renee invited her in, and for the first time, the Callens felt a bridge being built. Janet stayed for an hour, sipping coffee and sharing stories about how Paula had once fined her over a non-regulation bird feeder. The more she talked, the clearer it became that Paula's control had thrived on silence. Meanwhile, Paula tried to maintain her composure. She watered her flowers with extra vigor, waved stiffly at passing cars, and made her usual rounds with the clipboard. But neighbors weren't responding the same way. Some ignored her entirely. Others met her with curt smiles before retreating indoors. Even the younger families, once eager to stay on her good side, began whispering about how unfair she had been to Andre. That evening, Paula hosted a special HOA session at her home, inviting a handful of board members. She spoke passionately about the importance of rules, about protecting standards, but for the first time, she sensed their hesitation. One board member, Terry Alvarez, finally asked, "Paula, are you sure this isn't personal? People are talking. They don't see a jacket. They see a veteran being disrespected." Paula bristled. "It's not personal. It's about keeping order," but her words no longer landed with the same authority. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Across the street, Andre and his old teammates sat on the porch as the sun went down, sipping sweet tea Renee had made. Caleb leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Looks like the queen bee's losing her sting." Andre shook his head. "I'm not looking to humiliate her. I just want peace for my family." Marcassine gave him a steady look. "Peace doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes people need to see what strength looks like before they find their own Jonas, who had been quiet most of the evening, finally spoke. She won't let this go easily. People like her don't know how to back down, but the neighborhood's watching now. They'll decide what comes next." And Jonas was right. Over the next few days, neighbors began testing their voices. Someone left a note on the Callan's porch that read, "Thank you for your service. Don't change who you are." Another neighbor, a young dad named Omar Delgado, waved Andre over while tinkering with his car. "My brother served in the Marines," he said. "If she tried to pull that on him, I'd have lost it." "You handled it with more grace than I ever could." The Callans no longer felt like outsiders. Where there had been cold politeness, there was now warmth. Small, but growing. Paula's authority had cracked, and through that crack, something new was blooming. Solidarity. Still, Paula wasn't done. Late one evening, as Andre carried garbage to the curb, he saw her porch light flick on. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, clipboard visible under her elbow. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. She hadn't surrendered. Andre carried the trash can back up the driveway, shaking his head. "She's planning something," he muttered to himself. Inside, Renee caught the edge in his voice. "Let her plan. Whatever it is, she can't undo what's already changed." People see her differently now. Andre wanted to believe that. And yet, he knew Paula's need for control ran deeper than most realized. But while Paula plotted her next move, the neighborhood's patience with her was running out. And soon, her own reflection in their eyes would be harder to bear than any jacket she tried to fight. By the second week, the neighborhood buzz around Paula wasn't whispers anymore. It was open conversation. People who once nodded politely at her clipboard, demands now rolled their eyes, sometimes loud enough for her to hear. The authority she had spent years cultivating was slipping through her fingers, and she could feel it every time she walked down the street. One morning, as she made her rounds, Paula noticed something that sent a pang through her chest. The Simmons family, Harvey and his wife, Elaine, were trimming their hedges. Normally they would straighten up, wave, maybe even greet her with cautious small talk. This time, Harvey barely glanced up. Elaine gave her a polite but cool smile before turning back to her pruning. The shift was subtle, but to Paula, it felt like a wall rising where a door had once been. That night, Paula sat alone at her kitchen table, the clipboard resting in front of her like a useless relic. She flipped through the HOA handbook, searching for the familiar comfort of its rules and regulations, but each line felt hollow. She could hear Andre's words echoing in her head. This jacket isn't a threat. It's memory, sacrifice, and respect. She poured herself a glass of wine, staring out the window at the quiet street. For the first time in years, she questioned herself. Had she gone too far? Had her need for control turned her into the villain of her own community? The thought gnawed at her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Terry Alvarez, the board member who had questioned her at the special session. "Paula, people think you crossed a line. Maybe take a step back for now." She set the phone down, anger and humiliation rising in equal measure. Paula wasn't used to being told to back off. Control had been her anchor ever since her messy divorce, the thing that gave her life structure when everything else fell apart. Without it, she feared she'd be nothing. But deep down, she also knew the truth. She had humiliated herself, and everyone had seen it. Across the street, life for the Callans was moving forward. Andre mowed the lawn with Nia riding happily on the mower's edge. Renee planted flowers by the porch. Neighbors waved, stopping to chat, their friendliness more open than before. The jacket now hung by the door, not hidden, but visible, a quiet symbol of the battle fought and the respect earned. Paula watched all this from her window. A knot twisted in her stomach. She wanted to storm over, to reclaim her authority, to demand her rules be respected. Yet every time she imagined it, she saw Caleb, Jonas, and Marcassine standing on Andre's porch, their words echoing back at her. Respect goes both ways. That night, she found herself pacing. At some point, she muttered aloud, "Maybe they're right." But admitting that meant stripping away the armor she'd worn for years. The breaking point came at the next HOA meeting. Paula arrived early, clipboard in hand, prepared to push back and reassert herself. But when the meeting started, the room's energy was different. Conversations hushed as Andre walked in, again wearing his jacket, his family at his side. Behind him, Caleb, Jonas, and Marcassine followed, not in uniform, just as friends. Their presence was quiet, but undeniable. Paula cleared her throat, launching into her agenda. But halfway through, Janet Reyes raised her hand. "I think we need to talk about leadership," Janet said, her voice steady. "This board is supposed to serve the community, not control it. Lately it feels like one person's rules have mattered more than everyone else's voices." Murmurs of agreement spread across the room. Harvey added, "Andre's right. A man shouldn't be made to feel like a threat in his own home. If we keep going this way, people are going to leave this neighborhood instead of wanting to live here." Paula's face flushed. She tried to respond, but the room wasn't with her anymore. For the first time, people were speaking up openly, without fear of her clipboard or fines. Andre didn't gloat. He simply stood, his voice calm but firm. "We moved here for peace. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking for respect, for my family, for what we've lived through, and for the life we're trying to build." The room erupted in quiet applause, something unheard of at an HOA meeting. Paula sat frozen, clipboard limp in her lap. Walking home later, she felt the weight of her own undoing pressing down on her shoulders. She wasn't the leader anymore. She was the cautionary tale. But even in her humiliation, Paula still had one choice left to make. Keep clinging to control or finally admit that respect was worth more than any rule book. The days following the HOA meeting felt lighter in the neighborhood, where tension had once settled like fog. Now there was conversation, laughter, and a sense of freedom people hadn't realized they'd been missing. It wasn't that Paula Greaves vanished from the community. Her navy shutters still gleamed, her lawn still looked like a golf course. But her authority no longer held the same grip. For Andre, the change wasn't in grand gestures, but in the small, steady ways neighbors reached out. One Saturday morning, Omar Delgado waved him over while working under the hood of his car. "I meant what I said before," Omar told him. "You set an example for the rest of us. My son's been asking about your service since the meeting. He wants to know what courage looks like." I told him, "That's courage, right across the street." Andre felt the words land heavy, but warm. He had spent years carrying the memories of service quietly, not expecting recognition, only wanting peace. Yet here, in this suburban cul-de-sac, his story was suddenly teaching lessons his uniform alone never could. At home, Renee noticed a change in him too. He laughed more with Nia, took her on bike rides, let her help wash the truck, even when she splashed more water on herself than the car. The jacket still hung by the door, but it no longer carried the weight of conflict. It had become something else, a symbol not just of memory, but of dignity reclaimed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Andre sat on the porch steps with Caleb, Jonas, and Marcassine. They didn't talk much. Old friends didn't need many words. The silence between them was the kind that spoke volumes. At one point, Marcassine leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "You know what stuck with me most?" Not you standing up to her, not even the way the neighbors rallied. It was Nia, watching you through the window that first day. She saw her father hold his ground without raising his voice. "That's going to stay with her for the rest of her life." Andre nodded slowly, his eyes soft. "That's what matters." If she grows up knowing strength doesn't have to mean anger, then maybe I did something right, the others agreed. For them, battles were rarely about the surface issue. They were about what people learned, how they grew, and who they became afterward. Across the street, Paula's house sat in quiet defiance. She hadn't resigned from the HOA, but her power had dimmed. People still listened when she spoke, but they also pushed back, sometimes even laughed at her rigidity. She kept to herself more, watering flowers at odd hours, avoiding the gatherings she once controlled. One evening, Paula surprised everyone. She crossed the street and knocked on Andre's door. Renee answered, wary, but Andre joined her, his expression neutral. Paula cleared her throat. I didn't come to fight. I came to, well, I wanted to say I may have been wrong. About the jacket, about a lot of things. Her voice faltered. I let rules get in the way of respect. I'm not good at admitting mistakes, but maybe it's time I try. Andre studied her for a long moment before replying. It's not about me, Paula. It's about everyone who's tired of being silenced. You've got a chance to be better than the clipboard. Take it. She nodded stiffly, retreating without another word. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first crack in her armor of pride. That night, Andre sat with Renee on the porch swing, watching Nia chase fireflies across the yard. Funny, he said quietly. All of this started with a jacket. But it turned into something bigger. Renee leaned against his shoulder. Because people saw what it means to stand your ground with grace. That's a lesson worth more than any rule book. Andre smiled faintly, watching his daughter laugh as she cupped a glowing firefly in her hands. He thought of the men and women he'd served with, of the lives that had been lost, of the sacrifices woven into the fabric of his old jacket. For the first time since moving to Greensboro, he felt the peace he had been searching for. Not because Paula had backed down, but because he had shown his family and his community that dignity mattered. The neighborhood would never forget the confrontation, not because of the conflict, but because of what it revealed. That respect is not demanded through rules, but earned through understanding, courage, and humanity. And as the porch light flickered on and the evening settled in, Andre knew this was the life lesson worth holding on to. When you stand for what is right, with calm strength and truth on your side, people will remember, not the fight itself, but the way you carried it. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Never let someone strip away who you are to make themselves feel comfortable. Your worth isn't defined by their fear. It's defined by the way you stand, the way you live, and the respect you give in return. And if you want more stories that remind us why dignity and respect matter, don't forget to subscribe.